Chapter 6. The O's. Vesper's mouth fell open as she gazed at the heavens with wonder, her anger, a blazing torrent only moments before, forgotten like it never was. How? What did you do to me? Have I lost my mind? She stammered, sure that what she was seeing was some sort of trick. Finally, with a supreme effort, she tore her gaze away and gave her aunt a questioning look. I have done nothing. Your eyes are now open, child, said her aunt, spreading her arms wide. The threads of power you touched earlier today were just the beginning. Now the curtain of reality has been pulled back for you so that you may see the truth. This can't be real, whispered Vesper with a shudder, full of doubt, but somehow knowing in her heart that what she was seeing was real. Can it? I mean, what is it? This is the story of humanity from the very first moment that our minds touched the world to this very instant. Every life, every breath. All of the love and hate, each victory or defeat. Our story, told among the stars. Her aunt was right. The stars were still there, glowing brightly against the curtain of night, but they were covered and connected by a shimmer of subtly flashing images that were a confusing jumble at first, but the more she looked, the clearer they became, and understanding blossomed in her mind. The threads she had seen in the afternoon were there, more than she could possibly ever count in a single lifetime, all of them connected by the stars, forming a vast weave of pictures, each so tiny that they were almost impossible to see, unless she focused. That's me, she shouted, blinking in surprise, and pointing with excitement. Her aunt's face split into a wide grin, a look of pride filling her eyes. Yes. Our own threads are often easiest to follow, along with those that are the closest to us. Family, friends, those we love, and who love us. They pull at us the most, forming bonds that are forever etched into eternity. Vesper nodded absently, followed the glowing threads with a childish grin plastered on her face, easily identifying her aunt by the thick grey braids framing her round face, and on the other side of her own image, farther away, was her father in his robes of state, looking almost Roman, despite dark skin. She could make out friends she played with from the village, and if she went further out from her small family, she found people she had met only briefly. Where is my mother? She blurted out, scanning the threads spreading out from her image. There was a long pause, and Vesper wondered if her aunt had heard her. With a start she looked over to see the older woman's face was a mask of pain, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry, child, your mother chose to no longer be part of this world, she is lost to us. I don't understand, Vesper began, only to be silenced by her aunt, shaking her head. I am sorry. It's too painful to explain. Ask me again one day, when times are not so desperate. What do you mean desperate? Asked Vesper, hungry to know what was going on. And who are you talking to, and why would you say those horrible things about me? Her aunt sighed, pressing her lips together. Without a word she opened her arms and motioned for her to come closer, pulling her into a warm hug. Vesper hesitated at first, resisting with a bit of childish anger, but after a moment she collapsed into her embrace, grateful for the affection. I'm sorry, child. I wish I could make this easier for you. I wish you could have a normal childhood, like Lilith, and I did, but that will be impossible now, she said, rubbing small circles on her back. I must teach you quickly, before it's too late. Too late for what? Asked Vesper. I want you to look at the sky and tell me what you see, not just the stars and the images, but all of it, taken as a whole. Vesper snorted, pushing away from her aunt and turning her eyes once more to the spectacle in the sky. The images were like a mirage, shimmering in the distance, and their beauty, the fine detail became more pronounced the longer she looked, and the more it took her breath away. She was sure she could spend a lifetime and more studying it, learning from it. Part of her wondered if some, like her aunt, did just that. Without knowing how, she followed a thread that led to her father, and then she followed one to her father's father, and on, and on. Each strand weaving from one life to another, family lines stretching back through an infinite number of souls. It's like reading a story, Vesper continued, each thread telling a tale of how a person lived, who they touched, even how they died. I can see the love, the pain, all of it. Very good, child, and what else? I'm not sure, she said, narrowing her eyes as a thought came to her. Is this why we spend our evenings looking at the stars, so you can watch this? Yes. But don't let yourself be distracted by random thoughts, focus. Vesper nodded, pushing away the questions swirling around in her head. Trying to take it all in, she felt lost. There was too much, too many lives, too many stories. It all seemed like a jumbled mess, and she had no idea where to start. One moment she was looking far into the past at the lives of slaves in faraway Egypt, forced to build towering pyramids under vicious lashes of the whip. Dying forgotten after short and brutal lives. Then just as quickly she was following the thread of a handsome Roman boy on a hill, overlooking a vineyard of bright green grapes growing from black earth, so beautiful that she could almost taste wine on her tongue. Vesper moved on to watching a dimple-faced woman wrap her hair while getting ready for sleep, singing softly under her breath to a girl who had the same eyes as she did. I see Aurelia. And her mother, said Vesper excitedly. Making a connection, it's not just the past. I see what's happening now. Yes, sometimes if you are close or have something that belongs to the person. So I can spy on people in the village. Vesper giggled, her eyebrows raising with thoughts of mischief. Magda gave her a sidelong glance, shaking her head. This is not a thing to be abused. You cannot behave like a child, said her aunt, looking serious for a moment before breaking into a small laugh. But it never hurts to peek. Exactly. It's just a little fun. Besides, who will know? Her aunt went on trying to be serious, but the twinkle in her eye made it clear that she peeked often enough. Pushing her aunt's words to a droning buzz, Vesper focused on the threads extending out from her own tiny image. She found her father again, off to the side, wondering why he was so far from her, why there was so much space between them. Part of her was drawn to that open space, and the longer she stared, the larger it grew, and she felt like she was being drawn in, pulled into some dark void that had no end. In a heartbeat, all the images around her had vanished and there was only the void. Then she saw it, and her heart almost stopped. It's not a space, there used to be an image there, she's missing, gone, Vesper said, going in closer now, gooseflesh tingling up and down her arms despite the stifling nighttime heat. Yes, child, torn from existence, like she never existed. Not knowing how, Vesper went deeper, coming so close that she could see the threads in that area were ragged and torn, like fragile bits of cloth worn by time. And beyond, there was only darkness, and something else, a sound of some kind. A dissonant whisper that echoed back and forth so softly that she couldn't understand the words or even find its source. Narrowing her eyes, Vesper looked around, pulling her vision back to see better, and for the first time noticing the void wasn't unique and a multitude of ragged holes were scattered across the tapestry. Come back, Vesper. You go too far, said her aunt, her voice small and distant. Vesper tried to pull away, but her limbs refused to listen to her, like she was in a dream and couldn't wake, couldn't move. And deep down, part of her wanted to hear more, to decipher the haunting words spilling from the void. I can almost understand. I can hear my name. It knows me, she said in an excited tone, her ears straining to make out the alien tongue while she dove in deeper, an icy cold washing over her useless limbs. Vesper gasped in pain when a brilliant flare of light exploded in her face, blinding her, and knocking her onto her bottom. As always, you run before you can walk, she heard her aunt say as she blinked away after images dancing in her vision. Vesper pounded her fist to the dirt, frustrated that her aunt had distracted her. Why did you do that? I was so close. I could almost understand what it was saying, she said, finding herself sitting in the dirt, a prickling, painful sensation like needles piercing her skin, running up and down her body. Her aunt plopped down beside her and let out a deep sigh. Vesper was sure she was about to be berated once more for being headstrong, for doing what came naturally to her, but instead her aunt ran the pads of her fingers over Vesper's skin, like she was painting a picture, and the ice cold vanished like it never had been. Control over her limbs returned, and Magda smiled at her. I swear if I don't stop you, you'll be the death of me. I'm sorry, Auntie, I don't know what I'm doing, but it feels like I'm on the right path. Don't worry, child. Even if I wanted to, it seems that I cannot stop you. You grow in skill faster than anyone I have ever seen, she said. But still, you must be careful. The weave is not what it once was. It's dangerous, and we can't afford to lose you. It looks like it's been damaged, parts of it burnt away, said Vesper, thinking about what she had seen, what she had felt. And who exactly is we? Come, let's get off the ground and I will do my best to explain, said her aunt, motioning to the bench where they spent most of their evenings gazing at the stars. Vesper sat down with a sigh, embracing the feeling of doing something routine, doing something they did every night as if nothing had changed. But when she looked up, her pulse quickened and a cold lump of fear grew in the pit of her stomach. My ears are open. Her aunt looked down at her hands, a fierce look coming to her face as she began. Once, long ago in a different age, before the Romans ruled these lands, before men learned to write and record history. When even the stars in the sky were different, our people, the O's, ruled over a vast empire, so great that the entire continent bowed down to us. We were admired and feared. We grew great baobab trees, trees grander than these tiny things you see now, trees that lived for thousands of years. Reality bent to our will because our control over the weave was absolute. Her aunt pointed at a part of the sky, and Vesper saw the dawn of history and the bones of an empire that stretched across the known world. An empire lost to the sands of time. But as our empire grew, so did our arrogance, and with time, Olajume, the Almighty Creator punished us, limiting our power over His creation. The weave, once easily guided, now fought back against us like a ship in a violent storm. The harder we fought to change its course, the more it unraveled in our hands, and after a time, all of reality threatened to come apart. Like the holes in the pattern now, said Vesper, eyeing the rotting holes in the fabric of reality that she was just now starting to see with some clarity. Yes, said her aunt, nodding. But far worse. We lost a millennia of history, with parts of the world simply vanishing as if they never existed. But before the world would be lost to us, it was decided that we would limit the use of our power, stop trying to replace God by bending reality to our will. Where once everyone could tap into the weave, we limited power to only a chosen few, and even then they were taught to be subtle, to not rock the boat as it were. We had learned that small changes did less damage, were easier, and that grand displays were no longer tolerated, or in some cases, even possible. And did the pattern heal, repair itself? Asked Vesper, her curiosity piqued. In some ways yes, but there were parts of reality that had already been completely wiped from existence, continents that ceased to exist never returned. With time, because we lacked the power we once had, our empire shrank, and then vanished. The ancient baobab trees, once a symbol of our power, withered and died without our will to keep them going. They became a shadow of their former selves, and now all that remains of us, of the O's, are a few scattered villages, struggling to scrape together enough grain to sell to the Romans for protection. Vesper made a face, throwing her aunt a questioning look. Protection from whom? Magda frowned, looking away. Protection from enemies with a long memory of the indignities we caused. Enemies who grow stronger with each day. Vesper crossed her arms and leaned back, her mind reeling. Parts of it seemed impossible, and she couldn't imagine so much power once existed. The power to change the entire world. It seemed impossible. Or was it? She herself had done the impossible only this morning, traveling miles in the blink of an eye, drawing on power she could hardly understand, much less control. Sucking in a deep breath filled with the odor of night-blooming jasmine, she eyed the thread that led to her lonely image floating above, twinkling in the night sky. And what of me? What do you have planned for my future? It has been a long day, said her aunt, looking away. Perhaps it would be best if we go to bed. No, said Vesper louder than she had intended but still not backing down. The person you were talking to, they said there were others, but we needed to take up the mantle. Her aunt stood up, stretching like a cat, then motioning for her to take her hand. Very well, we have already begun this journey, we might as well finish it. Come with me and I will show you. Vesper hesitated for a moment before taking her aunt's hand, surprised that she had given in so easily. The day had been full of so many wonders that it had made her head spin, and she couldn't imagine what else could possibly happen, but she braced herself for the worst and reached out. Even knowing what to expect, a smile came to her face as the world shifted all around her, and they bounded along the lines of power, each step taking them miles at a time. The mundane world rushed past them in a blur of dark skies and bright stars, and just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. Vesper found herself standing atop a dark hill overlooking a vast city, bright with flickering lights that pushed back the night, in awe at the sheer size of it. It's beautiful, she said, her breath catching in her throat. How do they keep it all lit? A million lights from a million decadent souls, muttered her aunt under her breath, a frown coming to her face. Welcome to Rome, my child. The beauty you see is their decadence, their defiance of the natural order. These fools are so afraid of the night that they drink the empire dry of oil to push away the dark. This is Palatine Hill, Vesper said, staring in wonder. Look, there is the Temple of Saturn, and over there is the Forum with all the statues, just like in the books Father gave me. From a young age Vesper had read stories of this place. She had spent hours staring at drawings of its most important landmarks. With her finger she traced the massive stone aqueducts that fed the city's dazzling array of baths and fountains, but her books could never prepare her for the stunning view that filled her eyes. This was no backward village on the edge of civilization where the day ended when the sun went down. The city stayed awake when night fell, and Vesper found herself gaping at the tall marble buildings, majestic works of art in their own right, glowing under the light of thousands of lamps. In the distance her ear caught the melody of a high-pitched harp, and she could almost hear voices raised in song, as if some sort of celebration was going on. Is it a festival of some kind that we don't celebrate, or someone's birthday? Asked Vesper. Magda snorted, shaking her head. More than likely, but these people need little excuse to celebrate. They drink and carouse till all hours of the night without sense. It is a vile place and we will not stay long. Vesper flinched at the intensity in her aunt's voice, and she looked over to see hatred gleaming in her dark eyes, and something more, something she couldn't understand. She knew her aunt well. They had spent every waking moment together, and Vesper had never known her to show emotions so openly, so raw. Looking out over the gleaming city, her mind was flooded with questions, but she thought better than to ask, given her aunt's mood. "Why are we here then?" she asked. Her aunt didn't look at her, simply droning on in a voice that was cold and distant. "The O's, that is what we call our people. O's can mean many things depending on the tongue that speaks it. To many, it is often used to mean bold, daring, and even brave. These Romans. They call us the demon people. But among our own, it means chosen." "Chosen?" "Yes," she said, nodding her head. "Long ago we were chosen to rule over this land, but as I told you, we grew arrogant and were punished for our sins. After, it became our duty to protect it." "From what, drunken Romans?" asked Vesper with a nervous laugh, trying to lighten her aunt's mood. "No, child. This city is the heart of a great empire. What happens here echoes across the lives of millions of people that live under its rule. The world looks to Rome for direction. But let me ask you, can you see the weave here? Do you see the threads that connect the lives of those who live here?" Vesper's brows came together as she looked out over the flickering lights, her mind reeling when she realized what she saw or didn't see. "No. It's like there's nothing here." A chill washed over her when her aunt waved a hand, muttering strange words under her breath. The glowing city faded from her sight when the weave became more apparent, revealing the ragged tapestry hanging over the city. To the untrained eye, the city is a beacon of hope, but under the surface, if one looks closely, it is a festering cesspool. An open pit of corruption that will spill over and consume everything in its path unless we remain vigilant. Vesper stood stock still, unable to tear her eyes away. When she had seen the small tears in the pattern earlier that night, it had terrified her. The empty voids floating among the stars made her belly turn with nausea. But this was something worse. Entire swaths of the pattern were gone, with not a thread in sight that connected those in the city to the outside world. This place was barren, consumed by darkness. "How did this happen?" she asked, finding her voice at last. "We don't know," began Magda, her voice soft. "Lust, greed, envy. No one can be sure, but by the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. The more this void grows, the greater the madness among the people, its corruption growing like a stain on the souls of all who live here. All we could do was try to hold it all together. Since the time of Augustus, the Roman emperors have been wise enough to understand the danger and they have been our allies. Augustus himself founded the Praetorian Guard with the hope to help protect Rome from this madness, and the most powerful among the chosen stand with them in holding back the darkness that threatens to overflow and poison the rest of the world. People like your father? Your mother as well." "My mother?" said Vesper, her head whipping around to look at her aunt. "She lived here. Is this why her image is gone from the pattern?" The void took her. Magda sighed, pressing her lips together before continuing. "After a fashion, but that does not matter now. What happened to your mother is far in the past. What concerns us is the future. Your future." Vesper's brows drew together at her aunt's words, her first thought being that the older woman had lost her mind. "You want me to?" "To what?" I want you to control yourself. I want you to listen when I speak and not run off face first into danger like some fool Roman. Yes, but, and no more talking back either. There is too much at risk. Vesper pressed her lips together, swallowing the denial that was at the tip of her tongue. Instead raising her chin and lowering her eyes in acceptance. Very good child, said her aunt, looking back toward the city and pointing. Now, as I was saying, our long-standing agreement with the Empire is that one of the chosen serves as the Emperor's hand, using our power, our ability to manipulate the weave to protect the world from the dark forces that threaten to consume it. This was your mother's duty for a time, and is your father's duty now. I thought you said my mother was a fierce protector of our people, that our enemies feared her, she began, only to catch herself and then swallow her tongue. Sorry, go on. Your mother was very powerful, and her very name made our enemies tremble in fear, but she did it from this city, from Rome. She and the emperor were closer than most, and he gave her a great deal of freedom to carry out her duties as his hand, and she used that freedom to see our enemies crushed by Roman legions. Vesper wrapped her arms around herself as she looked out over the bright city, the hair on her arms standing on end. She was still in awe of its beauty, its majesty, but now she was terrified of it. Is that what you were talking about before? Am I meant to serve here? It is not certain. You and the other children will be tested, and the strongest will represent our people and serve as hand. What about my father? Asked Vesper. The role of hand is a difficult one, thankless in many ways. The power required to stand against Rome's vileness wears on a person, grinds them down like stone used to mill flour, and as a result, your father's health is failing. So we have taken the example of the emperors, to begin training replacements while the current hand is still serving. Just as the emperor's son, Commodus, is being groomed to replace him, one of the children will join your father in Rome, and replace him when the time comes. She had seen her father only a few times over the last few years, and his visits were so short that she hardly knew him. He was a stranger to her, a distant figure that she knew only from her aunt's stories. Growing up, she had been resentful that he was away so much, but with time she understood that his position meant that they lived a far better life than most of the people in their village, and she was grateful for that. Now that she knew it cost him his health, his life, she felt a strange mix of guilt and determination. The very least she could do to honor him would be to follow in the path he had laid down for her, bring honor to her people while making the world a better place. I will meet any challenge you place in my path, she said, drawing in a deep breath, turning to face her aunt. I will be better, stronger than anyone else. I swear. Magda's wide smile returned, and she patted Vesper on the cheek. Very good child, I have never been so proud. So when do we begin? Tomorrow, with the rising sun, the elders and myself will begin training you and the others. I promise you, it will be difficult, but you will learn such things that your head will spin with wonder, she said, extending her hand once more. Now let us return home. We have spent too long wallowing in Roman filth. Vesper smiled, taking her aunt's hand, and giving it a squeeze full of warmth and affection. In the blink of an eye, the hilltop and the majestic city with its bright lights was gone, replaced by the simple village that she called home. Part of her wondered if she would look at it the same way after witnessing the glory of Rome with its million flickering lights. In the distance she heard a sharp cry, and for a moment she thought it was a scream. She turned to face her small village, curious as to what could have made such a noise. She'd expected that it would be mostly dark, with maybe a few torches or hearths burning low, but instead the night was aglow. Orange flame blazing against the black sky. Sparks of red and ochre looking like a million fireflies were dancing above the flames. The screams were from her people, and the village burned.